Hi, I'm Jonathan, and welcome to Search the Scriptures. Today, we are going to look at Genesis 37. It's the introduction of Joseph in his teenage years. He's 17. Jacob has brought his family to dwell in Canaan, the land of his father. And so he has buried Isaac, but he's raising his family now. And it starts off Jacob lived in the land of his father, sojourning the land of Canaan. And then we meet Joseph being 17 years old. Then Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. So you have some players here. You have Jacob, the patriarch. He is the father that has chosen a favorite among his sons. Now, that is something that you may need to take into account, that it's not advisable to choose favorites among your children. There's always going to be strife when that happens. But he's just one of the players in the story, because then there are all of the brothers who are at this point, with the exception of Benjamin, who is young at this point, very young, maybe 1 year old or 2 years old. He is the youngest, but everybody else, Joseph is 17, and he would be younger than all of his other brothers. They were all grown men at this point. They're all capable of having their own families. They're all shepherds in their own right. They're all tending to flocks in their own fields. As in fact, this story will tell us, they will go as far as nearly 100 miles away from this encampment in Canaan to tend to the different flocks that they have under their care. And that's what the players are in this story. But not only do they hate him because Jacob has chosen him as favorite, Joseph has dreams that kind of elevate him. And it seems that God has given him two different visions. One where he is a sheaf of wheat that rises up above the sheaves that represent his brothers, and they all bow down to him. And he tells his brother this. Sometimes we have to learn interpersonal communications, that maybe we don't need to tell people everything we're thinking or everything that we're dreaming, just to keep conversation, keep relationships at a good level. But Joseph's just young. He's naive at this moment. He doesn't realize he's been given a dream from God, so he shares it. But then he also has another dream that is cosmic in scope. And he says that when he has this dream, he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." But then he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. So the ground here, the basis here, is just hatred among the brothers for Joseph, because here's the young whippersnapper, the teenager, who is going to be elevated above all of them. He's already been elevated because his father has chosen him. He's given him a nice robe that has declared his preeminence above the other brothers. But then he's also essentially flaunting it before them and saying, "I'm going to be the one you're all going to bow down to. I've had dreams about." So later, the story goes on. Jacob sends Joseph to bring resources to his brothers who are far off, at least 60, 70, 80 miles away. Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan, and they saw him from afar. And before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." But Reuben, when he heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, throw him into the pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty, and there was no water. And the brothers go sit down to eat, and looking up, they saw this caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, and Judah, then a brother who will be very prominent, that will come keenly in the next chapter in his own story, says to his brother, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites." They end up selling him for 20 shekels of silver, which is the typical going price for a young male that would be in slavery. Reuben comes back, sees that his brother's gone. He tears his cloak in mourning. They go back, they tell Jacob they've put blood of a goat onto this robe of many colors, and they tell him that Joseph has been devoured by a wild animal. And he goes down in mourning, and he says, "I'll go down to Sheol to my son mourning." And thus his father wept for him. But meanwhile, the Midianites had sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, an office of Pharaoh. So this is the common known story of Joseph, the one who was sold into slavery by his hateful brothers. There's not a lot mention of Yahweh in the story. We assume that God gave him these dreams. Later on, Joseph will tell his brothers that what you meant for evil, God meant for good, to save this family. Reuben here has lost his privilege in a previous chapter when he's slept with his father's concubine, and he's trying to be restored into the good graces of his father, but he's very useful because he saves the life of his brother from being murdered by his hateful brother. So Joseph is saved there, a way of salvation, even through the sin of his brothers here. So we see that at least there's a sense in the story that Joseph recognizes that he is a participant in the providence of God. He knows of the promise. He was with his father at Bethel when Yahweh came down and reconfirmed the covenant promise that there would be an offspring that would bless all the nations of the earth through Jacob and his descendants. Somehow it's going to work out. And so Joseph is quiet here. We don't hear of any of his pleading. If there was any later in chapter 42, there'll be some mention of pleading, but we don't see it here. We don't see him fighting back. We don't see an aggressiveness. We just see him quietly go along with what is happening. So for us, we say, where's Jesus in this story? Isaiah 53:7 will tell us that Joseph is prefiguring Christ as the suffering servant, the one who is led as a lamb to the slaughter, that does not open his mouth to rebuke, to respond, to plead for his life, but instead gives it freely for those that he will save. Joseph is going to give his life. Essentially, it does not come to death, but it seems like he's willing for that to be the case. But he will end up giving his life in service to his family that will end up rescuing them after famine and drought. Jesus, though, gives his life for us on the cross, even quietly pleading with the Father, but then surrendering his will to the will of God and going in our place on the cross, taking on the scorn of men, the weight of our sin, and freeing us through the weight and just magnitude of his death. And then free and given new life in his resurrection. So when we read Joseph, it's not just a fun story that we can use to tell with flannel graphs in children's church, dress up in a multicolored robe, but it is a story that points forward to the promise keeper who uses all things to work in his providence towards the promise that is kept, that is Jesus, the one who comes to work salvation for you and me. I'm Jonathan. Thanks for searching the scriptures with me. See you next time.